The etymology of consciousness tells us that conscious derives from con, meaning with or together, and sire, to know or to see. It has the same derivation as conscience. Thus, the root meaning of both consciousness and conscience is knowing with or seeing with an other. In contrast, the word science, which also derives from sire, means simple knowing, that is, knowing without witness. So etymology indicates that the phenomena of consciousness and conscience are somehow related, and that the experience of consciousness is made up of two factors, knowing and witness. In other words, consciousness is the experience of knowing together with an other, that is, in a setting of two-ness. In our previous videos, we have explored the two sides of the knowing factor of consciousness. Number 1, the experience of being the knowing subject, and number 2, the experience of being the known object. One could say that we begin our psychic existence in the unconscious state of known object, and only laboriously with the growth of the ego achieve the relatively tranquil status of knowing subject. Then, if development is to proceed, the relative freedom we have won must be relinquished as the ego becomes aware that it is the object of a transpersonal subject, namely the self. After both these experiences, the way is open for the reconciling third, which emphasizes the full meaning of knowing with. The process of knowing is a power process. To be a knower means to dominate the known object by the power of logos. To be the known one means to be the victim of the knower. To participate in the process of knowing means to play one of these two roles or both alternatively. However, the definition of consciousness as knowing with has a second factor. It involves not only knowing but also witness. Witness is the dynamism of connectedness, the relationship principle. If knowing is a function of logos, witness is a function of eros. We thus reach the unexpected discovery that the word we use for the highest value, consciousness, is in its root meaning a conjunctio, a union of logos and eros. The experience of knowing with can be understood to mean the ability to participate in a knowing process simultaneously as subject and object, the knower and the known. This is only possible within a relationship to an object that can also be a subject. Practically, this means either a relationship with an outer other, a person, or an inner other, the self. In reality, both are required, although one's attitude type will determine the relative importance of outer and inner factors. The extrovert gives primary emphasis to the relationship with the outer expression of the self, and the introvert gives first value to relationship with the inner manifestation of the self. The process of becoming conscious requires both seeing and being seen, knowing and being known. This is not hard to understand from the standpoint of the ego, but if there is to be true witness in our knowing, the same must apply to the other center of the process, namely the self, which means that the self must also become an object in order to become conscious. In answer to Job, Jung tells us specifically that existence is only real when it is conscious to somebody. That is why the Creator needs conscious man, even though from sheer unconsciousness he would like to prevent him from becoming conscious. Because Job has seen Yahweh's immoral nature, Yahweh is obliged to change. In psychological terms, because the self has been seen by the ego, the self's consciousness has been promoted. In this way, God or the self needs man. The pursuit of consciousness then does not allow one to rest in the attitude of being known and contained in God. The ego has a responsibility to the self to be its knowing subject as well as its knowing object. This idea of mutual knowing between the ego and the self is expressed theologically by Meister Eckhart. It must be understood that this is all the same thing, knowing God and being known by God, and seeing God and being seen by God. In Ion, Jung collects examples, especially from Gnosticism, of the image of the ignorant or unconscious God and of changes that occur in the God image in the course of cultural development. He then summarizes his conclusions. These utterances on the nature of the deity express transformation of the God image, which run parallel with changes in human consciousness, though one would be at a loss to say which is the cause of the other. The God image is not something invented, it is an experience that comes upon man spontaneously. The unconscious God image can therefore alter the state of consciousness, just as the latter can modify the God image once it has become conscious. This obviously has nothing to do with the prime truth, the unknown God, at least nothing that could be verified. Psychologically, however, the idea of God's ignorance or of the unconscious God is of the utmost importance because it identifies the deity with the luminosity of the unconscious. The reciprocal relationships between the ego and the self, in which the self knowing the ego promotes ego consciousness and the ego's knowing the self promotes self-consciousness, have interesting implications. Ordinarily, we think that the suprapersonal powers and images are projections of our own mind, but if reciprocity exists, we equally may be projections of the transpersonal other. One of Jung's dreams brings up this idea. I had a dream once. In the dream, I was on a hiking trip. I was walking along a little road through a hilly landscape. The sun was shining and I had a wide view in all directions. Then I came to a small wayside chapel. The door was ajar and I went in. To my surprise, there was no image of the Virgin on the altar and no crucifix either, but only a wonderful flower arrangement. But then I saw that on the floor in front of the altar, facing me, sat a yogi in lotus posture, in deep meditation. When I looked at him more closely, I realized that he had my face. I started in profound fright and awoke with the thought, so he is the one who is meditating me. He has a dream and I am it. I knew that when he awakened, I would no longer be.